What Ferrari discovered in Lewis Hamilton's car during the second week of testing in Bahrain not only changed its assessment of the SF26, it changed its ambition for the entire 2026 season. Subscribe to continue uploading more of this type of content now, if we continue. Now I ask you something very direct. What if I told you that Ferrari didn't really know the potential it had until they thoroughly analyzed Hamilton's data in Sakhir? Because what happened in that second week in Bahrain was not just a promising long run or an eye-catching fast lap. It was an internal discovery that forced engineers to completely rethink what they thought they understood about the car. An SF26 that, when within its perfect window, generated aerodynamic efficiency figures that not even they expected so soon. A car that in race simulation seemed stable, consistent, almost dominant, but outside that window it became unpredictable. And the most shocking thing was not what we saw in the timetable. That's what they saw in the telemetry. Because in that second week in Bahrain, Ferrari went from caution to conviction. And when that happens in Maranello, it means that something big may be brewing. The second week of testing in Bahrain began for Ferrari with a very clear objective: to validate correlations, confirm that the simulator work coincided with the track, and understand if the SF26 was really in the performance window they projected. It was not about looking for headlines, nor about setting the best time. It was about understanding the car. And it was precisely in that methodical process that something appeared that they did not expect to find so soon. In the first long runs with Lewis Hamilton, the data began to show stability in race pace greater than expected. On a circuit like Sakhir, where thermal degradation is critical and the asphalt punishes the rear axle, the SF26 not only maintained consistent times, but did so without sudden peaks in performance drop. Internally, that was already a sign. But what really generated impact was the subsequent analysis in telemetry. The aerodynamic efficiency ratio was above the initial simulations, especially in medium load configurations. The car generated support without paying the usual price in drag. That balance was not theoretical, it was happening on the track. Ferrari then began to cross-check data sector by sector. In slow traction areas, the car showed an ability to apply power without breaking the rear end. Mechanical stability and flat bottom work seemed aligned in a much more fine-tuned manner than expected. But the most revealing thing was how that efficiency translated into competitive top speed without the need to excessively unload the rear wing. That combination is gold in Formula One. Charge when you need it, efficiency when you demand it. However, the analysis was not linear, because along with that discovery, the other side of SF26 appeared. When the hybrid system strayed slightly out of the ideal thermal range, straight-line power delivery began to show small drops at the end of deployment. It was not a structural failure, but it was an operational fragility. In some simulations, the car seemed untouchable. In others, it lost that competitive edge. The conclusion was clear. The car had a very high roof, but a narrow operating window. And that's where the impact was greatest within the team. Ferrari understood that they did not need more downforce. They didn't need a design revolution. What they needed was precision. Precision in the hybrid map, precision in cooling, precision in the balance between front and rear axle to avoid forcing wear. The SF26 was not a car that required brute force of development. It was a car that demanded technical finesse. During that second week, priorities changed. Technical meetings stopped revolving around how much support can we add and started focusing on how do we keep the car in its sweet spot for as long as possible. Because when I was there, the numbers were for reference. When he left there, he became vulnerable. And most importantly, this discovery was not public. It was not necessarily reflected in a spectacular return that made headlines. It was an internal, cold, analytical discovery. One of those that changes the mentality of a team. Ferrari arrived in Bahrain with caution after what was seen in previous weeks. He came away from the second week with a quiet conviction. There's something special about the car. When a car shows long-run stability, good traction, and superior aerodynamic efficiency at a circuit like Sakhir, rival engineers are quick to ask questions. And that's exactly what happened. The performance of Hamilton's SF26 wasn't outrageous in terms of pure fastest lap, but it was outrageous in consistency. And in the pre-season, consistency is often more revealing than the stopwatch. Part of the focus began to focus on the rear area of the car. The behavior of the flat bottom and the rear suspension seemed to allow a very clean load transfer during acceleration. The car did not collapse aerodynamically when power was applied, something that in the current generation is extremely difficult to achieve without compromising stability or generating excessive wear. This cleanliness in the delivery of support raised technical suspicions and led to specific inspections of the flat bottom and rear architecture, not because of a direct accusation, but because the performance forced us to look closely. But while outside there was talk of possible gray areas and ingenious solutions, inside Ferrari the conversation was different. The real debate was not whether the car was legal or innovative. It was whether they could control that potential without it turning against them. Because the deeper they dug into the second week's data, the more evident and uncomfortable reality became. The SF26 was extremely dependent on very specific parameters. Battery temperature, state of charge, thermal management of the ERS, dynamic height of the car, everything had to be aligned with surgical precision. If one of those factors deviated slightly, the car lost that magical efficiency and became a simply competitive, but not dominant car. That is the central dilemma that arises in this act. Ferrari is not facing a slow car that needs aggressive evolution. You are looking at a potentially reference car that demands operational perfection. And that changes the pressure. Because now the margin for strategic error, setup, or even piloting is reduced. The second week in Bahrain left a conclusion that was not said publicly, but that marked the roadmap. Immediate development should not focus on adding more absolute performance, but on widening the operational window. Make the car less sensitive without sacrificing what makes it special. And that is one of the most complex challenges in Formula One, because touching one variable can destroy the global balance. Furthermore, another silent but determining factor appears: Hamilton's style. Its ability to modulate braking, manage traction, and adapt its handling to a car with a narrow window can be a weapon, or a risk if the car does not allow that freedom in changing conditions. In the second week, it became clear that when Lewis found the exact spot, the SF26 responded with almost immediate symbiosis. But the question Ferrari has begun to ask itself is whether that level of synchronization can be repeated under real racing pressure. And this is where the story gets even more interesting. Because when a car has such a high roof and such a delicate base, any small change can turn an advantage into vulnerability. The second week in Bahrain did not end when the checkered flag fell on the final day of testing. It ended days later in Maranello when the engineers finished processing each layer of data from the SF26 and understood something that completely changes the narrative of a project. They were not building a car to defend themselves. They were fine-tuning a weapon that could make real differences if used correctly. But this is where the real pressure begins, because discovering potential is exciting. Managing it under real conditions is a completely different story. Ferrari left Bahrain knowing that the SF26 has a very high competitive ceiling. The observed aerodynamic efficiency, stability in long runs, and clean traction on corner exit were no coincidence. They were the result of well-conceived architecture. But they also understood that this performance depends on keeping multiple factors aligned: dynamic height, aeromechanical balance, hybrid system temperature, battery charge status, and thermal degradation of the rear axle. A car with a narrow window demands absolute precision from the driver. And if there is someone capable of living with a delicate but explosive car when everything is right, it is Lewis Hamilton. In Bahrain, when he found the right balance, the car responded with stability that reinforced the team's internal confidence. But Formula One is not decided under ideal conditions. It is decided when something goes wrong, when the wind changes, when the strategy requires extending a stint longer than expected, when traffic alters the temperature of clean air. Ferrari now knows that its car can be a reference, but he also knows that he can become vulnerable if he loses that millimetric balance. And therein lies the true consequence of what they discovered in the second week. They can no longer hide behind prudent speech. They can no longer say that they are in the understanding phase. They have seen the potential. They've seen that the SF26 can put up numbers that put them in the real championship conversation. That changes the mentality. Because when you know you have the performance, the pressure increases. Each technical decision weighs more. Each evolution must be perfectly calibrated. Each adjustment can widen the window or break the delicate balance that makes the car special. The second week in Bahrain was not simply another test on the calendar. It was the moment when Ferrari stopped wondering if the project worked and started wondering if they would be able to squeeze it out without destroying it. And that is the question that defines this Act 3. Are we facing the beginning of a season in which Ferrari, thanks to what it discovered in Sakhir, can set the pace, or facing a concept so sharp that any mistake could turn its greatest strength into its greatest weakness? The SF26 ceased to be a mystery and became a silent technical statement. At Sakhir, they understood that they are not facing a limited car that needs to be rescued with aggressive evolutions. They are looking at a car with very high potential, capable of offering aerodynamic efficiency, stability in long runs and solid traction, as long as it remains within an extremely precise range. And therein lies the key to everything. Ferrari can no longer hide behind the adaptation process. You can no longer talk about a project under construction. In Bahrain, they found something that changes the internal narrative. The car works. The question now is not whether the SF26 is fast. The question is whether they can make it consistent. Subscribe to continue uploading more of that content. Now you really think about all this.